25 years ago, a secret plan was set in motion. A list of 7 Muslim-majority countries marked for destruction. This isn't a conspiracy theory. The source? General Wesley Clark, a 4-star general and former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. He saw a memo just weeks after 9/11, outlining a 5-year campaign to take out 7 countries. We're going to dig into the facts, the timeline, and the events that followed. We'll break down the numbers, the troop deployments, the sanctions, the casualties. We'll connect the dots between this alleged plan and the chaos that's engulfed the Middle East and North Africa for 2 decades. So buckle up. We're about to go down a rabbit hole most people never see. We'll look at each of these 7 countries, one by one, and see how the events line up with what General Clark claims he saw. Is it all coincidence, or evidence of a calculated long-term strategy? Let's get into it. Let's start where the memo started, Iraq. Just weeks after 9/11, the official focus was Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda. Iraq had nothing to do with it. The 9/11 Commission found no credible evidence of a link between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda, but the push for war was relentless. Colin Powell at the UN with a vial of anthrax. It was a masterclass in propaganda, manufacturing consent for war. The invasion happened in 2003. Mission accomplished, right? Instead, Iraq descended into brutal insurgency, sectarian violence, and collapse. Hundreds of thousands of civilians died. The WMDs never found. The entire justification was a lie. Iraq's infrastructure was destroyed, historical sites looted, and a power vacuum allowed ISIS to rise. The cost? Trillions of dollars. Instead, it fueled endless war and chaos. A shattered Iraq became a hornet's nest. Iraq was the opening salvo in a campaign planned in the shadows. Iraq wasn't an isolated event, it was phase 1. 1 down, 6 to go. The war's legacy is a fractured nation, endless conflict, and a region set ablaze. Iraq was the first domino. The question is, who was next? After Iraq, the memo's crosshairs moved to Syria. Unlike Iraq, this wasn't a direct invasion, it was a proxy war. Syria was stable, if authoritarian, but it was on the list. Declassified documents show the US was funding opposition groups in Syria as early as the mid-2000s. When protests erupted in 2011, external powers were ready to escalate. What began as calls for reform was hijacked. Money and weapons flooded in. The moderate rebels' narrative masked a shifting landscape, with many fighters linked to extremist groups like al-Nusra and ISIS. The death toll? Over 500,000. The refugee crisis? Catastrophic. Millions displaced. The goal: topple Assad, break Syria's alliance with Iran and Hezbollah, and sever the so-called Shia Crescent. Chemical weapons attacks became flashpoints, with questions about who was truly responsible. Russia's 2015 intervention changed the game, creating a standoff between nuclear powers. Today, Syria is fractured. Government, Turkish-backed rebels, US-backed Kurds, and extremist pockets. The US still occupies Syrian territory, controlling oil fields. It's not about democracy, it's about resources and control. Syria was torn apart to fit a larger agenda. 2 down. The pattern is clear: destabilize, divide, and conquer. The human cost? Immeasurable. The region? Permanently destabilized. The world? One step closer to the brink. Syria's destruction wasn't an accident. It was a calculated move. The next country on the list faced a different kind of war. The methods changed, but the objective stayed the same. Let's keep going. Who was next? The third country on the memo, Lebanon. Lebanon wasn't invaded, but the target was clear: Hezbollah. Hezbollah is more than a militia. It's a political party, a social force, and for many, a defender against Israeli aggression. The 2006 war saw Israel launch a massive assault after a cross-border raid by Hezbollah. The goal? Break Hezbollah's power and reshape the region. But Hezbollah survived, even gained prestige. When military defeat failed, the strategy shifted to economic strangulation. US sanctions targeted Hezbollah and Lebanon's economy, triggering financial collapse. The Lebanese lira lost over 90% of its value. Life savings vanished. The 2020 Beirut port explosion deepened the crisis, fueling blame and division. The aim turned the people against Hezbollah, weakened the axis of resistance. Lebanon is a key link between Iran and the Mediterranean. Keeping Lebanon in crisis serves US and Israeli goals. Bleed Hezbollah, destabilize the region. The suffering of ordinary Lebanese is collateral damage. Lebanon's inclusion on the list was about breaking resistance, not regime change. The methods were different, but the objective was the same: remove obstacles to US strategy. The pressure is relentless, a slow-motion strangulation. Lebanon's fate was sealed by a memo written in secret. The country pays the price to this day. 3 down. The next target, North Africa. The playbook would look familiar, but the stakes were even higher. Let's move on. Libya was next. Here's what happened. Next up, Libya. For decades, Gaddafi ruled Libya. Brutal, but the country had Africa's highest standard of living. Gaddafi dismantled his WMDs and cooperated with the West, but he had bigger plans, a gold-backed African currency to challenge the petrodollar. Western powers saw this as a threat. In 2011, Arab Spring protests became the pretext for intervention. The media warned of massacres in Benghazi, claims later found exaggerated. NATO's no-fly zone became a full-scale bombing campaign hunting Gaddafi. The result? Gaddafi was killed, and Libya collapsed into chaos. Rival militias, warlords, and ISIS filled the vacuum. The humanitarian crisis worsened. Open-air slave markets emerged. Libya's oil wealth was up for grabs, but the nation was destroyed. The intervention stopped Gaddafi's currency plans and secured Western access to oil. The cost? A failed state, regional chaos, and a humanitarian nightmare. 4 down. The pattern: destabilize, divide, and control. Libya's collapse was no accident. It was by design. The next country on the list, Somalia. The methods would change, but the outcome was the same. Let's see how the plan played out in the Horn of Africa. Somalia's story is a warning. Here's why. 5 down. Somalia, the 5th country on the list. Somalia's government collapsed in 1991, leaving chaos and warlords. In 2006, the Islamic Courts Union brought rare stability to Mogadishu. But the ICU was Islamist, and Washington saw them as the next Taliban. The US backed Ethiopia's invasion to oust the ICU. The result? The ICU was destroyed, but Al-Shabaab, a more radical group, emerged. Somalia became a battleground for America's forever war. Drone strikes, special forces, and proxy battles. Civilian casualties mounted, but the war stayed out of the headlines. Somalia's strategic coastline controls vital shipping lanes. A strong, independent Somalia could threaten Western interests. Instead, the country remains fractured, a playground for proxy wars. Any attempt at homegrown stability that didn't align with US interests was crushed. The policy: keep Somalia weak, divided, and dependent. 5 down. The pattern holds: destabilize, divide, and control. Somalia's suffering is part of a larger strategy. The next target? Sudan. The method: divide and conquer. Let's see how it played out. 6 down. Sudan, the 6th country on the list. For decades, Sudan was Africa's largest country, rich in oil, ruled by Omar al-Bashir. The US labeled Sudan a state sponsor of terrorism and targeted it for partition. The long civil war between North and South provided the fault line. Western powers backed Southern rebels, framing it as a fight for freedom. In 2011, South Sudan gained independence, taking most of the oil. The new nation quickly collapsed into civil war, creating a humanitarian disaster. The original Sudan was left smaller, weaker, and still unstable. The chaos prevented a strong, unified, oil-rich Sudan from emerging. After Bashir's ouster in 2019, hopes for democracy faded. Another coup, more conflict. Sudan's story is classic: divide and conquer, break a potential rival into weaker pieces. Both Sudans descended into violence and chaos. The plan worked: destabilize, partition, and control. 6 down. Only one country left on the list, the biggest target of all, Iran. Let's see how the pressure built. The final target, Iran. For 40 years, Iran has been enemy number 1 for the US, the one that got away. The other countries were pieces on a chessboard, removed to isolate Iran. The king, the campaign: relentless sanctions, economic warfare, cyber attacks, assassinations, and constant threats. Sanctions devastated Iran's economy, causing inflation and shortages. Covert war included the Stuxnet virus and assassinations of nuclear scientists. The 2015 nuclear deal offered hope, but the US withdrew and reimposed harsher sanctions. The real goal: regime change, not just nuclear limits. The 2020 assassination of General Soleimani was a massive escalation, an act of war. US military bases surround Iran, a policy of encirclement. The aim: contain, weaken, and ultimately collapse the Islamic Republic. So far, Iran has survived, but remains under siege. Any spark could ignite a regional war with global consequences. The plan that started with Iraq was always meant to end with Iran. The question: will that final chapter be written? 7 countries, 1 pattern. The evidence is in the outcomes. The world is still living with the consequences. The memo's shadow looms large. The story isn't over. The pattern is the plan. Let's wrap up. 7 countries: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. Viewed together, a chilling pattern emerges: destabilization, partition, and destruction. This isn't about defending brutal regimes, it's about questioning the right to secretly decide the fate of nations. Wars based on lies, chaos for profit and power. The evidence is there if you're willing to look. Don't just take my word for it. Read, research, connect the dots. If you found this valuable, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives. The plan was laid out years ago. The world needs to know the truth. Stay curious.